This is without a doubt the worst episode ever. Stay tuned to learn from the master of comics. He wishes he was like G.I. Joe, but is more like Harvey Picar. Everything you want to know about comic books in this episode of Media Channels with special guest Ken Flatt. This is Media Channels, a multimedia corp production, bringing you information about the latest media trends, helpful tutorials, and commentary on the digital world around you. Welcome everyone, my name is Stuart Rastry, hosting episode number 18 of the Media Channels podcast on December the 31st, 2018. Today is a special episode featuring my special guest, Ken Flatt. He is an old-time friend and country bumpkin that have brought him in here today to mix up the pace a bit and dig deep into the trenches of comic book warfare. Ken, thank you for being on the podcast today. So how has your journey been so far up to the great white wasteland of northwestern Ontario?
Well, hello, Stu. Thanks for inviting me onto your podcast. I'm currently a resident of Mississauga, Ontario. I've come back here for the Christmas holiday and for New Year's, visiting family and friends, yourself included, and it's been pretty laid back so far, except for the snowstorm that happened a few days ago. So, otherwise, it's been fine. Thank you, Stu.
Alrighty, great. Can you tell me a little bit more about yourself and how you got involved in the comics?
Well, I got involved with comics very early. I was a very early reader, and some of that included the adaptation of the original Star Wars movie from 1977.
Okay.
And basically, I learned to read at 3 years old, and pretty much, other than a brief period in the 1990s where I sort of fell out of it, I've been reading comic books for most of my adult life. And comics and creators that I enjoyed as a kid, of course, Star Wars, the Marvel version that came out back in the 70s through the late 80s, and also G.I. Joe, A Real American Hero, which was also a Marvel publication, and other ones like some Conan the Barbarian, Star Wars, various toy and movie tie-ins.
I myself, I liked Conan as a kid as well, and it does have a certain nostalgia for me. Do you think it will ever become a thing again?
Well, what I can tell you is there is going to be a new series from Marvel starting in January. It's written by a fellow named Jason Aaron, who's been around for some time. He's written Star Wars comics and Thor for Marvel as well.
Okay.
Very established writer, very, very good at what he does. And I'm not sure of the artist right at the moment. I think there'll be a rotating crew of artists. But it is starting this month. They were being published by Dark Horse Comics back several years ago. There were Conan and King Conan comics. And will it become a thing again? It's hard to say. It depends on how... It's hard to know when lightning is going to strike, because sometimes a series that people sort of regard sort of meh at the beginning, then all of a sudden, for whatever reason, the writing, the artwork, it's like lightning in a bottle, and people just pick up on it, and it turns into a hit. Unlike the Star Wars series that Mr. Aaron worked on back, I believe it was about 10 years ago now.
Okay.
Maybe not quite that long, but that was pretty much a guaranteed hit right from the start, because it was the time when the fandom was kind of hungry for a new take on Star Wars.
Okay. Do you think the Conans are worth anything at present, or?
The older ones from the 70s, definitely. Like the Savage Tales magazines, I think you have, or the Savage Sword of Conan magazines you have.
That's right.
Yeah, the older ones are definitely worth a fair bit. I'm not sure the exact prices. You'd have to look in the Overstreet price guide for like the exact pricing.
Yeah, I have a collection of Conans, and I should definitely get them checked out to see what the current price is.
Definitely, yeah.
It's a whole... I'm pretty sure I have at least 40 or 50 of them. Some of them are not worth anything, but I know some of the earlier ones definitely are.
Well, depending on the condition, too. I know you keep some of them in plastic, if not all of them. You have some of them in plastic bags, like the bags and backing board, so that will help a lot with the condition. But you'd have to get them graded by a store owner.
Oh, okay.
That'd be your best bet.
They would know more about it than anyone.
Sure. There's also a company called CGC that professionally grades books, but they also put them what they call it slabbing. They put it inside an acetate casing, and they list the condition grading on the front. It's like almost like a museum display copy sort of thing.
So CGC, what does that stand for?
I believe it's Comic Grading Company, but they can be found on the internet.
Okay, very good. I'll add a link to the description at the end of the video. And what is your favorite comic at the moment, and why?
Well, I don't really have a particular favorite. There are several I'm reading at the moment. I'm reading the continuation of the G.I. Joe Real American Hero that is actually being written by the writer from the 80s, Larry Hama, and it's written by a rotating crew of artists and is being published by IDW. The original Marvel series ended at issue 155 back in the 1990s, and this company, IDW, picked it up back in the middle 2000s and resumed the story from the last number. Like, they had a 155 and a half issue and 156, and now they've just passed the 250 issue mark.
Cool.
Yeah. It's that's one of my favorites. I'm also reading various James Bond comics from Dynamite Entertainment. Again, with the different, they have several series. They have James Bond Origin, which is his early days in the British Navy.
Okay.
In World War II, and they have the James Bond 007 semi-regular series. There's like arcs of about 6 issues by different creators. And what else?
I understand that you have. You've had quite a comic book collection in the past, and actually even still have one today. I was more aware of what you were dealing with in the past, but I don't know what's going on with your current collection. Can you tell us about your past and current collection?
Well, to be honest, I collect them more to read and enjoy the storylines. I have a few that are somewhat valuable, but I don't generally keep them as investments. I keep them just for reading and entertainment, and sometimes I'll donate them to secondhand stores or to friends when I'm done reading them.
What kind of secondhand stores would you send them to?
Oh, well, there's a series of secondhand shops in downtown Toronto and in Mississauga as well. There are places like Value Village. Of course you donate them for free.
Right.
And there are a chain of stores called BMV in the Metro Toronto area, and they will buy secondhand. Mostly they buy trade paperbacks. They deal a little bit in single issues, but mostly in trade paperbacks and resell those. Is it
a fairly large shop, or is it a smaller mom and pop shop?
The stores have different sizes. The one flagship their flagship location is in the Bloor and Bloor and Spadina area of Toronto, and it's 3 levels. And all the comic book stuff is on the top level, the 3rd level of the store. And they have but those are the only 2 locations I've really visited, are the Bloor and Spadina and the one near Dundas Square in downtown Toronto. They have quite a collection of secondhand trade paperbacks, graphic novels, and some single issues as well.
Have you found any gems at that location, or?
Well, in terms of entertainment value, sure. In terms of monetary value, again, I don't really take that into consideration.
Right.
It's been 17, 18 years since I've lived in that area. So I'm sure there are different ones I've read over the years, but unfortunately, as you get older, memory slips away, and nothing jumps to the mind at the moment. But it's a very good chain for finding stuff that might be, say, half price or maybe a little bit more. But there's always there's a wide selection of material there, and also the bigger chains like at Chapters Indigo.
Right.
Yeah.
That's pretty awesome.
Yeah.
Do you have any valuable comics or a wish list of valuable comics?
I don't really have a wish list. The last really valuable one I had was an issue of Incredible Hulk number 271, which was the first Marvel Comics color appearance of Rocket Raccoon, who is, of course, one of the Guardians of the Galaxy.
Right.
And I bought it for, I believe, $3.50 early in the 2000s, and I sold it at a show the weekend the first Guardians of the Galaxy movie opened. And the fellow I sold it to, I think he was the owner of the store that was putting on that convention. He looked at it, his hands started shaking like he just discovered gold.
Wow, that's pretty awesome.
And he gave me, I think it was $100 for it.
Okay, well, that's not too bad. I mean,
it was...
That's better than playing the stock market, that's for sure.
Better return. I mean, as I say, I don't have a lot of valuable issues. I collect a certain number of series every month, and I'll buy trade paperbacks of stuff to catch up on stories. But as far as valuable stuff, I don't really have a lot of that right now.
Guardians of the Galaxy, that
Right.
movie, I don't know if it's anything like the comic books, but the movie itself, I love that movie to death. And
Yeah.
I don't. Do you like the movie or?
I do like the first one a bit more than the second one. That lineup of the characters in the movies, that actually comes from a series that Marvel published, I believe in 2008, that was written by Dan Abnett and Andy Lanning.
Mm-hmm.
And that run was sort of the one that led to the development of the movies that we know today, the characters that we know today, that have been in the two Guardians movies and in Avengers: Infinity War. And those 25 issues, I believe, were collected in 2 trade paperback collections.
Okay. Is there another movie coming out, the Guardians movie?
There is. The third one's sort of on hold right now, but they're looking for a director for the third one, but they do have a story and a script, and I believe they have commitments from the cast to return, but they're looking for a new director. And they're going to be, well, not all of them, I guess, after knowing the events of Infinity War, but I believe the main cast will be returning for Avengers Endgame, which is due out this coming April.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Can't wait. Since we're speaking about Marvel Comics in general, what is your take on the current state of Marvel Comics? Do you think they're still creating original material?
Well, I don't follow the majority of their material because there was a time back in the 90s that they were publishing about 5 or 6 different spin-off books for each of their major sets of characters, and they're kind of going that way again. They do have some books that are singled out as being exceptional. There are several Star Wars books which different spin-off characters. Like there's a Darth Vader book, and actually they do sort of seasons instead of like an ongoing run. They'll do a season of like 10 or 12 or 25 issues. And most of the Star Wars books have gotten good notices critically and readership-wise. I've talked to people, and a lot of the comics, they don't have this, or in their opinion, they don't have the same zip that they had back in maybe the early 2000s, where they sort of resurged and interest in them started getting to the point where they started developing them as movies, of course, which began with 2008 with Iron Man starring Robert Downey Jr.
Right.
But it seems like they're starting to get back into the mode of publishing. I think there are maybe 5 Deadpool comics.
Okay.
And they're trying to bring back the X-Men, and I think the Fantastic Four as well, since I think they bought the rights back from 20th Century Fox, and I think they're going full steam ahead with bringing new Fantastic Four books out, and I'm pretty sure we'll be seeing Fantastic Four movies in the future from Marvel Studios as opposed to 20th Century Fox.
Okay. Now, Now, this is a quote that you told me recently, that comics have become awareness pamphlets for the movies. Now, was that sort of done in jest, or do you still agree with that statement?
Well, if we're speaking about Marvel Comics, that's sort of a consensus, I guess, I've reached with some of the people I hang out with at the store or at conventions. Like, I know several people who still collect most of the Marvel titles. But I've talked with 1 or 2 who don't really get the same sense of, I guess, wonder or...
Right. Like, it's not quite the same.
Yeah, it's not quite the same as it used to be. And I guess sort of my opinion and other people's opinions as well. It feels a bit more corporate, like mass-produced product.
Right.
I mean, there are creators who are trying to, I don't know about break the mold, but try to create compelling storylines. And over at DC has been a bit more... Again, I'm sort of this is from talking to other people because I don't collect many of the DC current titles. I mean, I buy some of their older trade paperbacks of older material that I missed when I was younger. But the state of the DC books is a bit more critically lauded, I guess, and their sales are decent.
Right.
And there's a sense with the Rebirth storyline that started some time ago that they're trying to bring a fresh take and new ideas. And they have several, very good writers and artists who are kind of, I guess, hoisting the banner, I suppose.
Right. Now, since we're a little bit nostalgic here about our comic books now, I remember some of the artwork back in the Conan series in the really early 70s books where they were all hand drawn and the coloring was absolutely spectacular. Now, compared to the type of artwork we get today, do you think that the artwork has gotten better or worse, or do you have an opinion?
Well, a lot of what's changed is the coloring techniques of comic books. There's a shift more to digital coloring as opposed to the 4-color or blending with the not dot matrix, but the production back in the 80s,
right,
where the coloring was a bit more simpler. With digital coloring, they can add more, depth and shading and that. Like the majority is still hand drawn and inked, like pencils and inks. Like pencils, which is sort of like rough draft layout, and then the inker will go over it and add definition to the image. But the coloring is done mainly by computers these days. I'm pretty sure there are some that still hand color, but mostly it's digital. And since you mentioned the older Conan books, there's one artist in particular I should talk about. His name is Tomas Giorello.
Okay.
He did a number of the King Conan books back for Dark Horse about 5 years ago. That man's work is amazing. If you can find him I believe he has an art book out as well called Inferno, and I believe he's done some stuff for Star Wars for Dark Horse back in the past, and for Green Lantern for DC a bit more recently. But he's one of the artists that has impressed me the most in this time. I mean, his heroes they stand tall. His villains are mean. His monsters are scary. I can't talk about that guy enough. His stuff is amazing.
That's awesome. We'll have to check him out.
Definitely.
And maybe at the end of the podcast, you can get me a link to that, and I'll post it for the
Sure.
audience.
Yeah.
Now, just to back up just slightly, now, when we're talking about digital drawing on a computer now, I know a lot of artists in graphic design will utilize digital tablets that they can draw directly on them to get the artwork into the computer. Do you think they're doing that, or do you think they're drawing like with Photoshop or something?
I think they are still. There may be some who do that on a tablet, but I believe there are a lot of artists who still draw on the old school comic layout pages. But what will happen is they will scan those pages as a digital file,
right,
and then send them along as a digital file to the other levels of the creator chain, like inkers or colorists and letterers as well.
Well, that's still pretty old school. I mean, even back in the 80s and 90s, that's what we'd do. We'd do
Right.
a lot of drawings, scan them to the computer, and then touch them up if needed.
That's right. But back in the older days, they would courier the pages to each other or fax them to each other.
Oh, wow.
As opposed to nowadays, where the majority of it is done for ease of communication over the internet, like by email or sending attachments.
Right.
And I'm not sure if they use Photoshop so much for the actual creating the final product that gets sent to the printers, but yeah, I believe most of it is done electronically now. And there are also web-based comics as well. Which is done a lot with self-publishing. People will use an internet platform and create their comics and put them on, I guess, a server, and that's how they get their product out. Which sometimes is a bit easier if you're just starting out than sending multiple submissions to the big companies. A lot of the big companies, I think, are still accepting artists, but they're not so much accepting writers because you can more quickly judge art samples as opposed to writing samples, where with writing samples, you have to sit down and actually invest time to read it. But if you find an artist, say at a convention, at an open submission call, and their stuff just pops right out, the editors can make that judgment right away.
Is there any web-based comics that I should be looking out for?
I haven't really kept up with that, and I believe there's one called Player versus Player. I'm not sure if that's still published or not. But if you do a search for, I know there's a site called Comixology which I believe does digital copies of most of the major companies' output, and probably independent publishers as well.
Great.
So that's probably a good starting point, is Comixology.
Okay. What I've also noticed more and more is that comic book movies and TV shows, they have seemed to exploded in the last decade. And well, as you were mentioning there with the Hulk and Iron Man, do you think that the various TV shows and movies do a good job of representing the comic book scene as it's seen today?
Certain examples do. The Marvel Cinematic Universe, they've done a terrific job with that, juggling all the different characters and storylines. But they have a pretty decent guiding hand. I believe the fellow's name is Kevin Feige. He's sort of, I guess you would say, he runs the show for Marvel Cinematic Universe. There are also the different Marvel TV shows like Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., which is on ABC. I believe that's still on.
Right.
But there are also the Netflix series, which are more for a mature audience. But Disney's agreement, and Disney, of course, being the owner of Marvel Studios and Comics, their agreement with Netflix is ending because they're starting their own streaming service called Disney Plus. I believe, what's happened is a lot of the Marvel Netflix series have had the current seasons that they're running or about to run. That's where they're going to end. I believe the original seasons will still remain on Netflix, but any new content is going to be produced for Disney Plus from this point forward.
Okay. Do you have a favorite DC or Marvel TV show that's
TV show?
Right.
I really enjoyed Daredevil, the Netflix Marvel show. Mm-hmm. So the fight choreography, the storylines are decent. Mm-hmm. The acting is decent, but definitely, usually the hallmark of the Daredevil series is each season they'll have like a 5 or 10 minute fight scene that takes place in a hallway that they work into the story. That's sort of like the signature for each season. I haven't watched season 3 yet, which is the most recent one, but apparently it's very good. So that would probably be my favorite Netflix Marvel show.
Okay.
I haven't really kept up with Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. or the DC TV shows like Arrow, although I hear Legends of Tomorrow is very good.
I'm kind of a fan of Gotham now. I don't think you are, but I find that they have a very particular way of coming across. I mean, it's a dark show, but at the same time they have done it in such a way that it seems very unique compared to a lot of other dark TV and movies that you would see today, where the character is very bland. Now, what's your take on Gotham itself?
My take, well, I started watching the first season of Gotham on Netflix up to the episode where people were getting killed by being dragged into the atmosphere by weather balloons.
Right.
They sort of lost me at that point. But I have heard from, again, I've just in conversations with different fans or comic book customers, I've heard that the show's improved over time. Mm-hmm. So, I can't really give too much comment on Gotham. I hear it's very good, and their interpretation of the Joker, I've seen a few clips on YouTube, and that looks very well acted.
Right.
So I'm not going to say I'd never watch it again, if time allows and the internet allows.
It's there. If you have a Sunday that you're not doing too much, you might pop it on and see what's going on there.
Never say never. Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah.
Okay, just to shift gears a little bit. Now, we've been talking about DC and we've been talking about Marvel, but how does Disney fit into all this? They've been gobbling up franchises recently. Do you think this is a good thing?
Well, having the bags of money to produce the films can be a good thing. I think it can be a good thing as long as, say, the suits let the creatives do their thing.
Right.
I mean, there has to be some supervision from the corporate or the office personnel, but sometimes they get into the mode where they want to tailor to a certain audience that they think they want to reach, and it doesn't always fit in well with the creative side. So,
what franchises has Disney taken over recently?
Most recently, Marvel. They bought out Marvel. Well, they distribute Marvel Studios cinematic, like the movie universe, and they also are going to be producing the Marvel TV product going forward. They also, of course, they own the Star Wars, the Star Wars. But the thing is that they're in that position for a reason. They produced a fair number of quality product over back to the 20s or 30s, I guess, and they have built up their I guess reservoir of entertainment product that people respond to, and I guess as long as they can allow the creative side to tell a compelling story that that I guess follows what you would call the hero's journey, as I guess the author Joseph Campbell sort of outlined in The Power of Myth and The Hero with a Thousand Faces. Most comics are a variation of that, the hero's journey.
So Disney, they haven't bought the comic book line itself, but they bought the studio.
Well, they do own Marvel. They do own Marvel as a comic book company.
Oh, as the comic book as well. Okay.
Right. In the same way as Warner Brothers owns DC Comics now.
Right. Okay. Yeah, it's the creative aspect of it. I mean, we have Star Wars, and I mean, I didn't like the prequels that much, and that was pre-Disney days, but I don't really like the new ones either. So, I mean, I don't know if that's really a thing to do with Disney, or if it's more to do with just the stories were just bad. But
I think it has to do more with the different creative personnel that work on each aspect of Star Wars. As I was saying about the Star Wars comic book series that Marvel is publishing, with Disney being the parent company, a lot of the Star Wars comics are very good because the main core title that, as I said, Jason Aaron was writing, it takes place in between the episode 4, which was of course the first Star Wars movie, A New Hope, and The Empire Strikes Back. And they've done it. There's actually the fellow who's writing it now is named Kieran Gillen. They've done a very good job of keeping the original spirit of the first Star Wars films alive and the character touches, and they're bringing in new characters and new situations. So I think with the newer films that have come out in the past few years, to various degrees of acceptance from the consumers, it's basically up to the creative teams on the films, I guess. Well, they're the different facets of the Star Wars universe.
Right. Yeah. I think Harrison Ford was a big part of Star Wars. Just his character was great, and
right.
And they brought him back for the for episode 7.
Force Awakens.
Force Awakens, and I mean, I would have preferred that he did more of his original character, but I mean, he wasn't bad either.
But he didn't want. I don't think he wanted to be part of the. He actually wanted to be written out of the Star Wars universe, and I think they actually. I guess, should we talk about spoiler territory for anyone who hasn't seen The Force Awakens yet?
Yeah, okay.
I think we can presume everyone has, but...
Big spoiler alert. Okay, so...
Spoiler alert.
So we're going to talk about spoilers here. I've seen them all, but...
yeah, same here.
But go ahead.
Han Solo, of course, dies in Episode 7, The Force Awakens, and I thought that was a nice end to... I mean, they do have to pass the torch to the new characters that they're bringing out in this new series of films, but his end came... He started out in Episode 4, of course, as you know, the very cynical smuggler. But in this one, where he met his end, I guess, he was sort of a believer in the power of the Force, and he thought he could bring his son, Kylo Ren, back. And he ended up sacrificing his life into the bargain, of course. And it was a tragic end, but it sort of resonated, for me anyway, and for other people as well. It wasn't really a shock to me because I'd read about it on the internet before I saw the film. Yeah, it was very hard to avoid the spoilers, but I liked how they brought his story to a close. Of course, it made you a little misty, I guess, but I thought it was a fitting end.
That's right.
Yeah.
And since we're on the topic of Star Wars, it seems that the entire franchise is built up around one whole family. Like it almost, I don't know if it's foreshadowing, but it almost seems like maybe... in the newer Star Wars, it still has that family dynamic. And if you take out the family dynamic out of it, then you have no Star Wars, basically. Because I've watched a few episodes of this might have been 4 or 5 years ago now, of Star Wars. I'm trying to think of the name. It's a kid series animation.
Are you thinking of the Clone Wars?
Clone Wars, right?
Yeah.
And it just doesn't seem to have that same dynamic that the movies had and whatnot. And I'm just thinking, the family dynamic is there, and if you start taking that away, then what are you left with, essentially?
Well, there are other facets besides the Skywalker family story that, like in the video games, the Knights of the Old Republic, I guess. I don't know if you played those at all. I haven't, but I'm aware of them. I think there are other compelling stories to be told. Definitely the Skywalker saga is a big one. And of course, that's going to come to an end next December, I believe, with Star Wars Episode 9.
Right.
And they will have to create new product from there. I think there are more stories that you can tell. As long as you keep the hero's journey and keep that framework that Joseph, like a lot of the Star Wars movies, George Lucas was inspired by Joseph Campbell and his books, The Power of Myth and The Hero with a Thousand Faces, and also by Akira Kurosawa films like The Hidden Fortress. As long as you keep that, I guess, that spine of the story, I think you can tell more stories. And there are many. There are also other comic book series with different characters that are entertaining as well. Dark Horse did a lot of them before Marvel got the license back when they bought Lucasfilm.
Okay, and Dark Horse Comics, they've been wrapped. I guess Disney purchased them out.
No, not yet. They're still independent.
Oh, still independent. Okay.
Yeah.
Do you think that's going to happen, or?
I don't know. I wouldn't really. You mean would they purchase Dark Horse as a studio?
That's right.
Or as a publishing company? Anything's possible if they wanted to. I think they would. I think they're concentrating more on the larger companies, it seems like, but like the jewel in Dark Horse's crown right now is the Hellboy series. I don't know if you're familiar with those films. Probably some of your listeners are.
Yeah, no, definitely. I've seen the movies. I haven't read the comics, but
right. Dark Horse also publishes Aliens and Predator comics, along with a number of independently created properties. But Star Wars and Conan were definitely big sellers for Dark Horse, and I think after that, Hellboy is their biggest property. But since Star Wars and Conan, and I'm pretty sure, I know Disney is angling to buy 20th Century Fox Studio.
Oh boy.
So apparently, that would include Aliens and Predator would basically become Disney properties as well.
Wow.
Yeah, and I'm not even sure how they got the Conan license back, because I thought that was a separate deal, unless they just offered Robert E. Howard's estates a big sum of money. I don't know the mechanics of that, to be honest with you.
Well, I'm sure someone that's listening will
will
know the answer to that. And I'm going to ask you a question here as well. What do you think is the most unique comic book series that you've ever read?
Oh, good. Oh, that's a interesting question. A unique one I have read would probably, this is going to be very obscure, but it's written by Larry Hama. It was created by Larry Hama, who wrote G.I. Joe and is still writing G.I. Joe. It's called Nth Man, the Ultimate Ninja, and it was published by Marvel as, I believe, a 16-issue series back in the late 80s, early 90s. Mm-hmm. If I try to give you the nickel version, I'm going to have to give you the dollar version, but it involves ninjutsu, special operations squads, metaphysics, Alpha to Omega.
The whole kitchen sink.
Pretty much. And it was a very, very entertaining book, and I'm sure it's pretty rare because it was still printed on the old newsprint stock. Like a lot of comic book paper stock is very glossy, but this was a series that was published on the old newsprint stock before, the revolution of the 90s, where they started using heavier paper stock and more digital production techniques. It's probably pretty hard to find. I have most of the issues myself, but I'm sure you can find them if you have conventions nearby or at a local comic book shop, or you can find them on eBay or Amazon.
Now, once upon a time when we were younger, you sold me a Terminator series, and was that part of Dark Horse as well, or? No,
that was published at that time. Dark Horse didn't exist at the time that was published. It was published by a company called Now Comics Corporation.
Right. Okay.
And but Dark Horse, so far they still have the Terminator license. They don't do as many books as they used to, like maybe a mini series a year. But they acquired the rights to that book you were talking about called Terminator: The Burning Earth, which of course was the start of one Alex Ross, who is a very famous interior art illustrator and mostly covers these days.
I found the artwork in the Terminator books very, it was very unique, but it was also, I liked it. It was distinct. Do you
Right.
know the artist's name or
Alex Ross.
Alex Ross? Okay.
Right. That was his first major work, I believe.
Okay.
Was for Terminator: The Burning Earth, and he developed his technique from there. And now he's known for the miniseries Marvels from Marvel Comics and Kingdom Come from DC, which was like an apocalyptic future version of the Superman, Batman, Wonder Woman story.
Wow.
Yeah.
So he has quite the career going for him, that's for sure.
Oh, he does, definitely.
Okay. Is there any up-and-coming comic book series that you think are going to be big or very interested in for comic books news like myself?
You know what? There are always new titles starting all the time from different companies. What I would recommend is check out sites like comicbookresources.com, which is shortened to cbr.com, or bleedingcool.com.
Okay.
Or you can go to a local comic book shop. I believe there are 2 left in the Thunder Bay area at the moment. And you can ask them for a copy of what's the monthly catalog published by Diamond Comic Distributors, which is the main distributor across North America. And this is like a 500-page, it's printed on like newsprint stock, but they list all the titles coming out from DC, Marvel, other big studios, and also independent publishers who submit their titles for consideration to Diamond Comic Distributors.
Awesome.
Yeah.
And I also remember, you mentioned...
sorry, I should mention, I believe the cover price is $5.35 Canadian. I get mine free because my comic shop gives it to me. I have a pull box at my local shop down in Mississauga. So.
Oh, you're an important guy.
Oh, yeah. I've ingratiated myself to a certain point, I guess. I mean, I've been going there almost since I've lived in the area.
Well, you certainly know more about comics than probably anyone else that I've ever met in my life. And
I don't even know the half of it, to be honest with you, but thank you.
It's kind of like with me, with computers, I know a lot of different things and connections with different people. You're on the comic book side, you're the go-to man, it seems, when I want to know something about comic books.
Well, thank you. No, I appreciate that. I mean, like I'm just one guy with my opinion. There are other people out there who can give guidance, like on the internet or in person, or even at ThunderCon, which I believe is the convention that goes on here nowadays.
Yeah, we have ThunderCon here. I've never been to it, but they do try to bring in some fairly high-key guests.
Yeah, I noticed they were trying to get Jim Starlin, who is basically the creator of the Infinity Gauntlet and the Infinity War, and a number of characters he created a number of the really important characters for Marvel back in the 70s and 80s.
And there was some controversy regarding one of the guests they were trying to bring in. I can't remember the guy's name, but he was in the TV series with the spaceship. It was called and he was also I guess can't think of the name right now, but
sorry, I can't really. I mean, I've only followed the fringes of ThunderCon.
Andromeda. That's the series.
Oh, okay.
So he was in Andromeda, and I think he was also Hercules in a movie or something. So they were trying to bring him here, but there was some controversy surrounding it, and they never ended up bringing it here. But
unfortunately, that's common with conventions. Even with the big one down in Toronto, which is the Fan Expo, they try to line up certain creators or TV celebrities or personalities, but sometimes a professional commitment gets in the way, and they can't always honor it. They have to sort of cancel because they have to go where the work is, unfortunately. If they're going to get they do make money selling autographs at the conventions, but they have to keep their professional self visible as well on TV screens and movie screens.
Right.
So unfortunately that does happen sometimes. I've seen several high profile guests cancel from the Fan Expo. So it does happen, unfortunately. I don't know what the specific controversy was with ThunderCon. I haven't really read up on it, so I can't comment on it.
I think it was something related to being politically correct, and they didn't like what he was saying. But I didn't follow it too closely, but I'm sure somebody...
Yeah, sorry, I can't really... that's kind of out of my... That's above my pay grade. I don't
above
really...
your pay grade, okay.
Yeah, I haven't read up on it, so I can't comment.
Right, okay. And there's also another interesting thing that the listeners should know about you, and that's in the past you had won a comic book contest. Can you tell us a little more about it?
That was, I guess, a case of lightning striking. I did work on there was a company called Valiant, which Valiant actually still exists today. It's been sort of resurrected, and they're doing pretty well as well. They have a smaller output of titles, but they are still viable. They were bought out by back in the 90s by a gaming studio called Acclaim Studios.
Okay.
They were still publishing the Valiant characters, but they invited people to submit a short synopsis for an issue of one of their books called Troublemakers.
Oh, okay, right. Troublemakers, yeah.
Right, which was
We're all
written.
troublemakers here.
Yeah, sure, yeah. And it was created by a fellow who's worked for Marvel and DC. And his name's Fabian Nicieza. He's actually done a lot of work on Deadpool in the past, on the Deadpool comics back in the 90s.
Right.
And I submitted my story idea, and I was chosen by Mr. Nicieza and his editorial staff to submit to work with them and create a full script for an issue of the Troublemakers book. So I shared a co-writing credit with Mr. Nicieza, and I was given complimentary copies, and I worked to a work for hire contract, which basically meant I was basically playing in their sandbox. I didn't own the characters or anything like that. So
right.
The story basically became theirs, which is the way a lot of work for hire.
That's how contests generally work.
Well, yeah. No, I'm sure there are other contests where you can submit your own original idea, but it was understood that the story I created would be for their universe, and I wouldn't really have any claim to saying I created so-and-so character, that sort of thing.
How long was the script that you created?
Well, the script for the total book was, I was credited as the co-writer. The script was 22 pages in total, but I was credited for as having written half of it.
Okay, right. And did it take you a long time to write the script, or is it just something that came naturally?
No, honestly, it was a lot of work. I went over and tried to rethink things. And of course, Mr. Nicieza offered me suggestions, and the editors offered suggestions as well. Mm-hmm. So I tried to work those in. To be honest, it was kind of a talking head story. It wasn't really anything. There was some tension near the end, but I wouldn't say it was anything as dynamic. I mean, I believe my strength is more like creating dialogue and, how people speak. I can't see myself orchestrating something like the Infinity War or the Infinity Gauntlet storyline. That's a little bit beyond me.
That's a pretty big project to take on, that's for sure.
I would need some more seasoning, definitely.
Okay.
But they treated me very well, and the book made it out to stands. I don't know if it's available digitally or not. I kind of doubt it, but I'm sure you can find back issues on. If for anyone who's interested, it was Troublemakers number 18, published in 1998.
Troublemakers number 18.
Number 18, that's
1988,
correct.
1988, okay. And
right.
How many copies do you still have yourself?
I think I have like 10 copies. Okay. I sort of bought. I was given, I believe, 10 complimentary copies from Acclaim Comics originally, but I've been sort of increasing my sales a stupid way and buying copies when I find them in at various stores or what have you.
Purchase 1,000 copies.
No, it wasn't quite that bad.
Not that bad.
But it was a fun little thing. It was not everyone can say it, and I'm grateful that I got the work experience. And to be honest, I've made some submissions in the following years. I submitted stuff to Marvel and to a company called Cross Generation, which is no longer around. But they sent me a nice letter saying, we see some potential. Keep doing what you're doing. But
right.
Sometimes I scribble down some ideas, but sort of paying the bills has gotten in the way of it. So,
no, isn't that how it usually goes?
But I mean, again, never say never. Who knows? Maybe I'll be in the shower one day and I'll get some amazing idea.
And then run with it.
But there are so many people out there who are trying to create their own stories, and it's a huge, like I say, it's a huge variety of stories to be told, and people who are waiting to tell their stories, and companies or publishing houses that are waiting to hear those stories and maybe bring them to the world. So anyone who wants to try and get into it, take art classes, read how-to books, I would say.
I think the biggest thing for me is, you don't have to agree with me on this, but I think if you're going to be creating a story, is that the characters have to be dynamic and they have to be interesting. A lot of what is being put out today, whether it's comic books, movies, or any sort of book, I find that characters are typically bland and they have no personality. So I think that's a big thing that people need to consider if they're going to be writing anything creative, really. Would you agree with that? Or?
Well, again, I can't really say I try to follow stuff that I find interesting, and I think that's what will happen. I think that's generally how things will go. I mean, there will always be those who are completists and they want to keep buying a certain book just to have the complete run.
Right.
Which I don't hold that against people, but it's not what I don't have the budget for it, unfortunately. So I tend to gravitate towards stuff that, as I said, the writing and the art come together and make a story that I can lose myself in. But I think generally, sooner or later, the stuff that reaches more people or resonates with more people, that'll eventually rise to the top.
Right. In comic books, I think my first comic book that I ever purchased when I was a kid was Ghost Rider, and I found that the character was very interesting. That's what drew me to it, and he had this flaming skull, and he was going around and doing his thing. It had a little bit of spooky atmosphere to it as well, and that's what got me interested into that comic book. And if you are creating characters like that, I think more people would be interested in it rather than just some cookie cutter type of character just thrown in there.
Well, I think there will always be people who are coming up with new concepts or characters that capture the imagination, as you said.
Right.
It may not necessarily be from the major publishers, although I'm sure there are new concepts coming from the major publishers now that do resonate with people like that. But I think people should try to discover the alternative publishing houses as well, like Dark Horse and IDW. And Image Publications as well. I believe all their stuff is 100% creator owned, and Image is actually the studio that where The Walking Dead started out back in, I believe, 2008.
Really? Okay.
And of course that was a creator owned property, and of course the different TV series have basically taken over. It was basically that series that started the whole zombie, I guess, renaissance of zombie films and TV.
No, I haven't watched that series, but people seem to like it. Have you seen it yourself? Or
I've only watched the first season. I thought the first season was very well done. It sort of got away from near the end. It sort of got away from the original storyline, and I think the last episode.
Okay.
I haven't watched any of the seasons since, some people like it, but I know people, I've talked to people, they feel it's kind of losing its direction or inspiration, I guess.
Right. And that happens with anything.
But who knows what will happen? I think it's season 9 that's coming up. Maybe they'll rejuvenate it. I mean, there's peaks and valleys all the time.
I guess there's only so much you can do with zombies. I mean, zombies are very sort of dull characters to begin with. You have to rely on the heroes of to make up the rest of the character. Well,
I think with the modern zombie movies, and I think this is going back to what George Romero did with Night of the Living Dead, the zombies are just sort of in a background threat, but it's always the human monsters that were the biggest threat.
Right.
I think that was sort of the driving idea behind a lot of I think it's The Walking Dead as well, with characters like Negan, who is one of the main villain in a number of the comics, and in I think the past 2 seasons of the show as well.
Okay.
I mean, the zombies are definitely a threat, of course, but they're sort of, I guess, the backdrop. I guess they're meant to be.
So you're not? Are you prepared for a zombie apocalypse, there, Ken?
Nope. No, not a bit. I'll run as far as I can, and if they get me, they get me. You
don't have a shotgun hidden somewhere. You can start taking out the zombies.
If I did, I couldn't talk about it.
Okay. Well,
but no, even if I did, they'd still get me.
Well, here in Thunder Bay, a lot of people have their shelters. I mean, it's a little bit more of a gun town than other places, but
well, I can't really say. I mean, I know it's hard to say. I mean, I know people. There are bow hunters and firearms enthusiasts, but I don't know. I haven't really talked to anyone.
Well, you could always put your hunting skills to the test if a zombie ever came up to you.
Yeah, well,
you get
maybe
a machete or something.
Yeah, sure. If it happens, we'll see how things go. But
okay,
in the grand scheme of things, I'm just me,
Oh, that's perfectly okay. And just to shift gears a little bit, now there is a stereotype regarding comic bookshop owners. How accurately would you say that the character from The Simpsons? What's the character's name? It's
I don't even remember. I know what you're talking about though.
Mr. Comic Book Guy.
Yeah.
For some reason, it's on the tip of my tongue, but I can't remember.
Yeah.
Would you say that's typical of some comic book shop owners, or that's just totally out there?
It may have been back in the 80s. It might have been easier to find people like that. But brick and mortar stores in general, bookstores, retail stores, they're trying to stay alive more than ever with, it's so much easier for people to go on Amazon or eBay and just order stuff. I can't recall any experiences like that. Most of the shop owners, I mean, I only go to one shop in Mississauga, but there are others in the Toronto area. I can't remember when I last met a stereotype that. A lot of the people who work in the shops, they're very well read, and most are approachable.
They know their stuff, right?
They know their stuff,
yeah.
And they're willing to share the knowledge with you or direct you to a book that you may be interested in. There are a number of different big shops in the Toronto area, like Beguiling is very more independent oriented or underground, I guess I should say, alternative. And then there's Silver Snail, which is into the major companies, plus some independent titles and a lot of toys and posters and memorabilia and stuff like that. But no, I think it's very hard to find that sort of unpleasant stereotype, I guess you would say. It's not so easy to find these days, and there may be a shop here and there like that, but again, I think retailers know they have to be as approachable as they can,
right, and
step up their game and keep the doors open, right? Because on the Bleeding Cool website, I read it seems like almost every week in the United States there's a store that's closing.
That's right,
and like, I don't know if you've ever checked out bleedingcool.com, but it seems like I check it out maybe once a week or so, but it seems like there's always a store. Actually, one store in Edmonton, I can't remember the name right now, but it was just rescued by another Edmonton area based store, more of a gaming store that sort of bought this store and said, we're going to keep the spirit of the place alive. I think what's happened is like console gaming and internet gaming has sort of taken it's captured people's imagination more than comic books have.
Right. And the thing with brick and mortar stores is you can go in there, you can flip through comics and, see if you're interested in it. You can't do that with Amazon. You can't do it the online shopping. And then the pictures sometimes that you see on the online websites are low quality and stuff. You don't know exactly what you're getting. Right.
It's not as tactile either. You don't get the feeling of flipping the pages. This has actually kind of been a surprise to me because I've heard that electronic books are supposed to pretty much negate the existence of paperback or hardcover books. But all of the chapters I go to, they always seem to be busy. It doesn't seem like the more tactile experience of reading a book or a comic book. It may not be like comic books as publications themselves. They may not be as popular, but I think there'll always be an audience for it because younger readers coming in. I know a lot of shops they want to appeal to the younger reader base with Free Comic Book Day that happens in the first weekend in May.
Right.
It's maybe a bit more difficult to compete with computer games or console games, but companies are trying to reach a younger consumer base.
Maybe I'm an old man and when it comes to books, I tend to prefer the physical book over the digital. And
same here, yeah.
And even though I'm in the business of everything online and digital, I still, for the most part, try not to have everything digital and have some hard copies of different things. And I just feel it's better in the long run.
Well, yeah, it's nicer to have the physical manifestation of it, I think, because I've even heard of some digital movie platforms where certain movies, they remove the movies from their library. And if you didn't have a physical copy, where are you going to get it from there on in?
That's right. And it's just having it sit on your shelf or just there,
Yeah.
If you break your tablet or something, it's on your tablet, and you got to go and retrieve it.
Yeah.
It's easy just to pick up a book and away you go. You don't even if you don't have any electricity, you can pick it up, and hopefully you got enough light to
read by candlelight. Sure,
read by candlelight. That happens sometimes up here in northwestern Ontario where we lose our electricity for hours on end, and what
yes,
can you do?
that is true. Not just Northwestern Ontario, other metro areas as well.
That's right. Yeah. In a previous podcast, I talked about how was it 2002? It was the Eastern Seaboard basically went out, had no electricity.
Yeah.
So Thunder Bay was spared from that, but everywhere else in Ontario basically got hit, and it was pretty bad.
Yeah, I think I was there for that. That was an interesting few days.
Luckily, it was in the middle of the summertime, and not like Quebec had a number of years ago. Quebec had a ice storm. It took out most of their power grid, and it took them weeks to get everything back up and running.
And BC as well, just recently. But
if you do experience an ice storm or a power outage, hey, pick up a comic book. It'll keep you occupied.
Sure, yeah. Just don't bring it too close to the candlelight. That's all.
All right. My next question for you is, if you could create any comic book series, what would it be about, and who would the artist be? Oh,
that's an interesting question. I would like to... I would probably want to work on a Jonah Hex. He was a Western character from DC Comics. I know I am a G.I. Joe fan. I'm a Star Wars fan and a Conan fan.
Mm-hmm.
But as far as being able to write something, I would like to write a Western. Or I don't know if it'd be necessarily a Jonah Hex book, but another Western character, maybe one of my own creation.
Is there a lot of Westerns comics, or not really?
Not as many these days. There are still a few that are published independently. I don't believe Jonah Hex has his own book anymore. DC did one back in the middle, or I guess the early 2010s.
Mm-hmm.
But it's not as big a genre as it used to be back in, say, the 50s or the 60s.
I know my dad is a big Western fan. He'll watch the same old Western movie hundreds of times and just go to the next one, and he has books about Westerns and whatnot. But I was not aware that there were actually any comic books that were Western. Maybe I should introduce him to a couple and see what he thinks about it.
He may have actually even read some of them back in his younger days. I mean, you had the Rawhide Kid, you had Jonah Hex. I think there are even some Wyatt Earp comics done back in I believe the 50s or 60s.
Mm-hmm.
But it's, like I said, it's not as prevalent a genre now as it was back then, but it's quite possible your father has read some of them already.
I think pretty much all the great Westerns have come, its golden age has come and gone, but there has been some attempts at revival, it seems, over the last 20 to 30 years, but never seems to really take hold.
Well, the one example I can think of is the HBO series Deadwood, which is actually they're producing a 2-hour movie, I believe, to wrap up the storyline. That's one of the, I mean, it's not for kids, I'll put it that way. It's very the violence is pretty graphic, and the language, a lot of bad language and adult situations. But I'm sure there have been Western comics published as well. There were some more mature reader Jonah Hex books that were made back in the late 90s.
Mm-hmm. Are there, since we're to the darker stuff and maybe a little bit more gory stuff, would you, are there still any really gory comic books or magazines? I mean, there was, we had Fangoria. I remember that was something that you were really into back in, I believe it was early 80s. And
it's been around for a while.
Is there anything still left to like that, or?
Well, the one horror comic book The Walking Dead, that's the big horror comic that's foremost in the consciousness right now. There are other ones that other companies do, but of course that's the one that everyone talks about. Fangoria is still around. It actually got relaunched by a new company called Cinestate. They turned it into a quarterly, more glossy publication.
Mm-hmm.
I believe it's about 120 pages every issue. And they had some rough times back about 5 years ago, where contributors weren't being paid, and the publishing house was having problems. But they have a new investor, and I have the first issue. I haven't read it all the way through.
Mm-hmm.
It's a bit pricier. The U.S. cover price is $19.79 a copy, which is like a tribute to the year it first started publication. And but the overall production and quality of the writing is very good. They have some very big name writers, and they also have features on makeup effects that you can create on your own that they had back in the old days of Fangoria.
So for our listeners, Fangoria, just explain summarize what it's about?
Oh, it's basically just a magazine focusing on horror films and how they're made and horror literature and how the special effects are created and how the creators come up with the stories and behind the scenes, mostly behind the scenes features.
So it's kind of like on Space Channel, you have it's a series. It goes into details on how the makeup artists are doing.
Sure, yeah.
So it basically, that's probably where they got their inspiration from, I would think.
More than likely, yeah. I should mention there's a magazine that's published in the Toronto area, actually, called Rue Morgue, which is they're like Fangoria, but they focus more on horror stories that have been in popular culture, like stories back from the 30s, and horror music, like horror influenced music bands and video game reviews and book reviews. And also they focus not so much on the behind the scenes, but more the creative process, not so much the mechanics of it. Right. Maybe a little bit here and there, but mostly about where horror fits into popular culture and entertainment.
Do you think horror's making a comeback a little bit, or?
I think it's become more viable, definitely, because the production cost of an average horror movie is a lot less than, say, a big blockbuster like the Avengers. I mean, right. The Avengers movies, of course, they're pretty much guaranteed at this point to generate money. But other blockbusters, they haven't really caught fire. But with a horror film, you have a relatively lower production budget. Like, say, the Stephen King adaptation of It that came out. I believe the second one is coming out this year, or this coming fall. But the first one came out this past fall, I believe.
All right.
And the production cost on that was relatively low. I think it was like 50 or 60 million. But the return was huge on it. Well, and of course, the money people are going to look at it and say, oh, this made a huge return on investment compared to, say, the last Star Wars standalone movie Solo, which kind of tanked.
Did you watch that? Or
I did. Yeah, it was okay. It wasn't anything groundbreaking. I mean, it was entertaining enough.
It wasn't as bad as I thought it would be, but I mean,
considering what happened, some of this trouble behind the scenes, it turned out okay. I mean, it wasn't. It didn't make me hate it.
It certainly could have been a lot better, but it wasn't the worst.
It could have been a lot worse. Yeah.
Now, since we're talking about horror, there was a movie back in the early 90s and 80s. It was Evil Dead.
Yes.
The Evil Dead series. And now there's a new TV show. I think it's been its third season, Ash versus the Evil Dead.
Yeah. Unfortunately, that's going to be the final season. They didn't pick it up for a fourth. I guess the production costs were, especially in the very last episode, the production costs were sort of escalating, I guess. And I guess they didn't figure it was going to be a long-term return on their investment. Like the Starz Network, which was showing it. I guess they figured the cost was going to be too prohibitive to keep going. I saw the 3 seasons. I enjoyed the show.
Mm-hmm. Oh, it's for the listeners out there. It is absolutely gory. And if you have a queasy stomach, do not watch it. I managed to watch some of the episodes, and I have to admit, after a while, I couldn't watch anymore because it was just getting pretty ridiculous. There were some scenes. There was one scene in particular where I was like, I can't believe they're doing this. But
there were a few for me like that, but I got a giggle out of it, I have to admit.
That's right. And I mean,
even more so than the original movies pushed the boundaries a bit back for the 80s or the 90s.
That's right. And the character Ash, I mean, he's he if you've never seen anything to do with Evil Dead, you have to watch the movies or the show, because his character is absolutely, he's got an awesome character. He might not.
Bruce he's very good.
Bruce Campbell, he's a good actor, and he knows how to make things a little bit more on the lighthearted side of something very gory.
Yes, definitely.
In this case, was there ever a comic book or a graphic novel of the Evil Deads? Or
there have been various Evil Dead and Army of Darkness comics published. Dark Horse published some back in, I believe, the mid to late 90s. Dynamite Entertainment, which is the company that runs with James Bond and other properties, they've been running with Evil Dead comics for the past, I'm not sure how long, but they've also been doing other properties like Reanimator and Vampirella.
Oh, wow, that's a blast from the past.
They've been running with several blasts from the past. Yeah, and I haven't read any of the Evil Dead or Army of Darkness comics, I have to confess, but they seem to do fairly well.
Oh, that's wonderful.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, I'm going to start to wrap this up a bit here, but I just wanted to know, for our listeners and for myself, now, if I were to get back into comic books, what series or I guess company would you recommend to someone who's just getting into it and maybe a little less, it doesn't have to necessarily be mainstream, but something that people can latch on to?
It's hard for me to recommend any of the Marvel or DC stuff because they have had several reboots and restarting of storylines. It's very hard to find a jumping off point for any of the big, like say Spider-Man or Batman. There are quality books coming out from the companies, but my best suggestion would be to check out the different websites such as cbr.com or ask your local comic shop retailer for a previews catalog.
Okay.
And you can sort of explore what's out there with the synopses that are published. And
would you recommend any older ones as well? Like, let's say some of the older series, maybe they're not very valuable. Maybe they'd be good for a good read.
Well, the good news is a lot of stuff gets put out in trade paperbacks. A lot of the older storylines from books, even the new storylines that are coming out from Marvel or DC or Image or IDW, they pretty much all the majors put out trade paperback collections of certain storylines that are maybe 5 or 6 issues long.
Right.
So if you can go to a bookstore or a used bookstore or even the public library, I believe. I'm not sure if the Thunder Bay Public Library does these days, but a lot of the Toronto area libraries will keep trade paperbacks and graphic novels for borrowing or lending.
I think they did have a collection. I don't know how large it is or anything, but that's definitely, I never even thought of that going to the library to.
Oh yeah. It's worth a look. Definitely.
Okay.
Or for readers in the other metropolitan areas. I'm sure their public libraries will have titles to read as well.
Okay, awesome. So was there anything else you would like to mention to the audience before we close up the podcast?
Basically just if you're interested into diving back into comics or for the first time, talk to a local comic shop owner, and I'm sure you can find Google reviews in your area for the different stores. They can guide you as well. And if you want to create, there are different how-to books and different courses you can take at different educational institutions. There's basically something out there for everyone, from superheroes to autobiographical or historical stories.
How about science fiction? I know.
Science fiction too, definitely. Right. Star Trek, Star Wars, even adaptations of like Philip K. Dick stuff, like Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep?
I was a big fan of the Stargate series. Is there anything similar to that? Or?
Just every now and again. I think there are Stargate comics coming out, but I think there's a company called American Mythology that does. They're a smaller independent publisher, but I believe they're still doing Stargate miniseries now and again. Yeah.
Oh, that's interesting. Something I should check out.
And there are Stargate miniseries from other companies as well. I think Dark Horse did some. I'm not sure.
Oh, okay. Well, we'll have to find that out and maybe put a link.
Definitely. There's a wide selection of titles and stories to dive into. Definitely. And I guess I just want to say Happy New Year to your listeners. And
yes, Happy New Year to the listeners. And this is going to wrap up today's episode of Media Channels. I would like to thank you for joining me today, Ken as well. And if you'd like to find out more, please consider adding myself, and I can relay the message or leave a comment on this podcast, and we will answer your question. And as always, thank you for watching or listening. You can leave questions for me in the comment section. Also, to view or listen to more of these podcasts, like our Facebook page, subscribe to our YouTube channel by using the watermark in the bottom right corner, or follow me on Twitter. You can also listen to these episodes on popular podcasting platforms such as Libsyn, iTunes, and Stitcher. For a full list of podcasting platforms, please see the description or visit our website at multimedia.ca/media-channels. And I appreciate your support, and trust me when I say that this isn't the worst episode ever. Have a good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining me.